Hello and welcome to Pod in My Backyard, the podcast that wants to end the housing crisis. I'm Eve McQuillan. I'm a housing campaigner and a private renter who would like to be able to afford a home one day. And I'm here today with Jay Morton. Jay's an architect. She's the director of Phillips Architects and host of the Architects for Change podcast. She's also an affordable housing campaign and works on the Architects Action for Affordable Housing campaign. So, Jay, thank you for joining us on the pod.
Thank you for having me.
Super. It's great to have you. So we talk a lot on this podcast about 1.5 million homes. It's a big government target. It would be nice if it happened. It would make a significant difference to, people's well-being, economic growth, etc. But we're being quite slow delivering them.
Yes, yeah. Indeed.
So we're not here to talk about the planning process as such, although maybe it will touch on that. But I'm interested in the speed of construction. How innovative are we in terms of construction as a country? What do we need to go do better? What's going on?
Well, I think first, almost backtrack to why everything is so slow. I think you're right. It's really, really great to have a government that's got an ambition to build. And I think that in the kind of sector, that's definitely, there's excitement and ambition in the air, but the sector is still really slow. Last year was a challenge for everybody. And I think there was the phrase, stay alive till 2025. In both with developers, contractors, architects, engineers, the whole industry. I've now coined the phrase just about exists in 2026 because it feels like the whole market is really, really stuck. And it's a mixture of things. I think planning, all the moves that have happened are it does sort of provide a little bit more stability and consistency. But in terms of how we're going to build the 1.5 million homes, it's going to be a mixture of low rise and high rise, and at the moment anything that's high rise is purely stuck in the Building Safety Act. So whilst this isn't actually maybe talking about innovation, I do think there does need to be a bit of bravery in readdressing that legislation and making sure that projects aren't stuck, because at the moment projects are being stuck for 40 weeks or more, which then obviously trickles back through the market in terms of cost and viability. So I think there's a sort of element of bravery that needs to come in to actually really look at that legislation and improve on that so that projects aren't getting stuck, because it's affecting the entire market. I mean, at the moment, contractors are now starting to see challenges because things aren't getting to site quick enough. So that's the sort of the other legislation point that's not just planning, it's the other end of the scale.
Let's talk through that for a moment, because people will be wondering what's going on with the building safety regulations. On paper, building safety regulations sound important. We've had Grenfell Tower, we can't forget. People want to live in safe homes. They also want regulatory processes to work quickly. What for you needs to happen in terms of getting that process moving quickly and also having regulations that are sensible, that keep us safe, but also mean that housing that we need is delivered?
I think there needs to be a coming together of more to make the actual legislation itself clear. Even today I was in a meeting for 2 hours, and yesterday I was in another meeting for 2 hours trying to work out if our project is actually a high-risk building or not, and if there's a way of making it not a high-risk building. So the legislation itself is quite messy, so it needs readdressing. And then on top of that, we need more regulators on the other side, so that once a project gets to the regulator, that they can actually assess it quickly, because I think there's such a backlog and there's not enough people to actually review these schemes. And I think because the legislation has there was another update at the end of last year. I think because it is so, it's been a bit inconsistent. I think they need to really invest time and really look at it and make sure that the legislation is actually doing what it intends to do. Because the aim for the legislation is to make sure that the buildings that we build are as safe as they can be, and also making sure that us as consultants and contractors, that there is that sort of golden thread that makes sure that we are designing and procuring the best building and making sure that it's safe in terms of construction and in terms of layout for escape and fire safety and all of those things. All of those things are right, but I think at the moment there's not enough. The legislation is actually still quite messy and not clear enough and not joined up enough. So I think there is some elements of the legislation that probably could flex and change, but it needs somebody to look at it in detail, because a lot of it came out quite quickly, because there was Grenfell was awful. something happened. We did need better legislation, but it's all come through a little bit piecemeal. So I think it does need to be looked at.
Okay, so clarity, clear guidelines,
Exactly.
so architects, developers, etc. can plan.
And we need that consistency and stability, because all the time we keep changing things, that has a massive knock-on effect in the market. Because then, leading back to your original question about innovation, why are we so slow to innovate? Compared to a lot of other industries, construction and delivering buildings and development, the actual profit margins are much smaller than if you were in any other, if you were making something and selling it, for instance. And
that's not what a lot of people think, of course, about the construction industry.
I think lots of people see. Sometimes I now more recently I've started to sound a little bit more like a Tory, going, "Oh, let's not be so mean to developers."
Yeah,
but it's the same across the board. That the profit margins are actually quite small, but the risk level is really high, because there's so many things that can happen, whether it be unknowns under the ground in a site, or supply chains of all those different materials that all need to come together, and then you might throw in other things that have happened. War in Ukraine, so energy, the cost of energy makes a massive difference to the cost of a building, the cost of labour. We've had Brexit, so our industry has basically been hit with everything they can possibly be hit with. Okay. And I know that's not unique just to the construction industry, but we've had change of legislation, Grenfell and change of legislation. We've had the Ukraine war. We've had interest rates because of Liz Truss, and we've had cost of labour and all the other challenges with supply because of Brexit, whether that be labour but also materials, because a lot of the materials for our buildings are not made here. They are made in Europe and other parts of the world. So we've basically been hit with everything, which then all of that feeds into this sort of melting pot of viability challenges. And anything new any new sort of legislation that adds on to that, it's just already making an already quite nervous industry even more fractured.
Okay,
if you like. I mean, we have the challenge to build 1.5 million homes. We should all be incredibly busy right now, but it has felt for the past year and a half like we are wading through treacle. Basically.
So talk me through that. So you have got planning permissions coming through, although perhaps not as quickly as they should be.
Yes.
And you have uncertainty over financing. You have difficulty getting projects off the ground.
I think there is a lot of projects on shelves.
Projects on shelves.
Yeah.
Right. And why aren't they being delivered? Those issues that you're talking about, I guess, what is the solution to get them delivered?
Well, I think there should be an ambition to look at all the projects that are on shelves, because a lot of them are designed already. But again, it's a lot of those have viability challenges, so adding in the second staircases, and again the cost of materials. So I think,
can you talk us through the second staircase point? This is about really tall buildings needing an extra staircase.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we've had quite a few projects that have had to then go back in and be redesigned to add in that additional staircase. And then once you add that therefore means the amount of area that you make money out of the site compared to the area you don't, which is the corridors and the stairs, on already quite constrained viability sites, then it's actually affected that as well. So in some cases, I think we are getting to the point where developers are having to go higher.
Is it a sensible policy? Does it make buildings safer?
That is a unique question. I think yes and no. It makes a lot of sense to have a second stair, but I think there are other solutions and other ways around it. Again, I think this goes back to your earlier question about innovation. We need to start sort of researching a bit more, testing more, whether it be through testing materials and warranting materials and try and find new innovative ways of building, but also elements of the second stair. Are there other ways around it? Okay. Is there a way that's just as safe without having to add that second stair? I think I personally, but then on the sort of personal point of view, I probably would prefer there to be two if I was on a tall building.
Yeah.
But I think if there were other ways of doing it, then that's something that needs to be looked at. I wouldn't say that I'm not a fire safety expert, so I wouldn't say yes or no. Personally, I think my own hunch is, I think I would prefer it.
Okay.
But I think this is where everything's been moving for the past few years, all these moving parts. Once everything settles down and it's like, okay, we do need two stairs, then the market can shift, the cost of land shifts, viability assessments shift, and then everyone knows what they're doing. But that's not really the main issue. The issue is now also the sort of the fact that projects are getting stuck, because we're just designing things with more than one stairs now. We're just doing that. That's fine. That in a way was almost the simplest bit.
Yeah.
It's all the other elements.
So this innovation then, talk me through what you would like to see.
Well, I think the biggest point of innovation is also looking at sustainability and how we build our buildings. So I could be vegan tomorrow, I could stop flying, all of these things. That is nothing in comparison to the fact that I'm designing buildings that then therefore we're pouring a ton of concrete. Like the construction industry is 38% of embodied carbon, of carbon emissions in the world. I think it's slightly less in the UK, but that's something that needs to change. Yeah. And we have our 1.5 million homes. We will use up our carbon allowance if we build all those homes. So we need to think of other ways.
And offsetting, etc. That's not an answer to that challenge.
It could be. And I did actually interview for my podcast a guy called Mark Stevenson, who's looking at taking carbon out of the atmosphere in ways. But we should also be reducing the amount of carbon that we are emitting. Bio-based materials is the easiest way, because therefore...
What's a bio-based material?
Bio-based material, so timber, hemp, even stone in a way, that hasn't been processed. So stone is actually an incredibly low embodied carbon material. And we've done some research in the practice where, let's say, everything that's below 11 metres can be built out of bio-based materials.
How many stories is 11 metres?
Sort of 3 to 4.
3 to 4, okay.
I mean, you could push that to 18, but it depends on how big your ground floor is as well.
Okay.
Everything below 11 metres, rather than saying it can be out of bio-based material, maybe we should say it should be out of bio-based materials. And I mentioned the material cross-laminated timber before, which is used a lot for buildings in Europe. Quite often that's thought of as like the solution here, but actually we don't grow the right trees to make that product. Okay. But what we do grow is perfectly great trees to do stick timber solutions. And so we've looked at maybe if everything below that level is made out of a bio-based material, how could that how can that boost our forestry, boost our biodiversity, boost our economy, boost jobs across the country? And then looking at so that's just for the structure. And then the insulation could be hemp. Again, that's a material that's grown. And then the facade, the bit on the outside, could be lime-based render or stone. And so we've looked at almost creating a new vernacular. So if you think about Victorian house, I mean, we're in Lambeth right now, in South London, Victorian terrace houses and Georgian terrace houses everywhere. They were built out of the clay that they sat on, in a way. They were built out of that material and fired. Brick is actually incredibly high in terms of embodied carbon because of the firing process. But what's nice about it is using the material of the site. But if you think about it as a sort of UK vernacular, well, maybe we use the materials that we grow and make best.
Okay.
And again, quoting my other podcast and a really great engineer called Steve Webb, that was his thought. He spoke about that a lot. Almost also, thinking like the potato-tomato line. Like we're neither hot nor cold. Okay. So we're stone and stick.
We can have potato and tomato.
Yeah, we're not just timber. We're not just stone. We're actually a little bit of both. And actually, this could be part of this new vernacular, a new sustainable vernacular. But to get that moving and get all developers to be using this way of building, we need to have we need the infrastructure. We need the government to invest in manufacturing of these materials, and also the testing and warrantying of these details. Yeah. And then the other side of innovation is for buildings that are tall. How do we reduce the embodied carbon with those? And that is much, much harder because they at the moment, particularly with fire regulation, they need to be made out of concrete. They could be stone potentially, but again, we need the government to invest. We need a boost in different manufacturing and different materials and the research into that, and then almost push that through much quicker. So almost like the vaccine task force, almost like that.
Yeah. So it sounds like there might be some need for some state investment up front to make these material markets viable, and then the industry will catch up.
I think it needs to be a sort of innovation in construction. Let's bring everyone together, warranty providers, government, manufacturers.
So this issue with warranty, I want to come on to that in a
Yeah.
minute, because we were talking about that before that we started the podcast. And I
Yeah.
think that's quite interesting in terms of a hurdle, which isn't, I guess, a physical hurdle. And that's about insurance, etc., keeping it up. So it sounds like we need some upfront government investment really to kind of make these markets work. And so it sounds like we need the government to take a bit of the lead here to make these markets work, so these materials are available, so that the construction sector can adapt. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think it needs to be a coming together of manufacturers, warranty providers, consultants, architects, engineers, and government to almost sort of push more innovative ways and of construction, and really invest in the. We need the sort of infrastructure as to get that happening. New businesses coming forward, but like I said, it needs everyone coming together. And I think if the government have that vision, a little bit like Peter Kyle was all talking about AI and technology, we need almost the same kind of rhetoric for construction and new ways of construction. And if you think about that, if we can lead the way on that, we can export that as well. We can export that knowledge. We can export those materials or whatever it might be. But this is we've got this 1.5 million home ambition. We have, as we know, all the investment in transport, because it's not just building houses, it's building transport, it's building infrastructure. We've got a lot of building to do to have this new sustainable future where everyone has a home and everyone can get about. So therefore, we actually need investment and in innovation in the actual how we build these things, whether it be technology and offsite manufacture, new materials, opening up our quarries to actually use stone as a not just for the pretty bits, but actually for the sort of the core bits. I mean, a friend of mine, Pierre Badou, who's a stonemason, he's on his one-man campaign. We should be building our sewer pipes out of stone. Anything that's concrete should be stone.
Okay.
So we just need to be looking at everything. What can we change? How can we reduce the embodied carbon? And actually create better buildings and better places at the end of it as well.
Brilliant. I mean, this sounds exciting. It sounds innovative. Why hasn't it happened so far?
The big challenge is our industry is also incredibly risk averse.
Okay.
Partly because of the profit margins that I was talking about before.
Yeah, the poor developers, boohoo.
Yeah, poor developers and contractors.
Yeah.
If you're a builder, you've been given a design of a building, you need to build it for the price that you've told the client you're going to build it for. But there could be all sorts of things, whether supply chain issues,
Brexit,
cock-ups, things under the ground that you didn't know were there. So many moving parts that therefore can mean that the profit you hope you were going to make is not. I mean, the profit margin is on average about 2.6%. I mean, it's not. Okay. It's not huge, which therefore makes everything's on edge. So then, if you want to do something new, if you're being asked to use a material, use a product you haven't used before, build in a way that you haven't built before, you're less likely to do that because of the risk. And
but are these products more expensive or cheaper?
I think it depends. So, I mean, some things that haven't even been invented yet.
Okay,
I think we need to invent new things. I mean, I always come back to there's a company near me in New Cross that are growing insulation out of mushrooms. But it will be like 30 years before I get to specify that and replace the normal.
But they grow overnight.
No, exactly. Because they're going through the sort of testing, getting funding, regulated, all of these things. But people like that should be like, well, we need that to happen much, much faster. And so we need to sort of invest in that and have in a way that a contractor has confidence in using that product as well. And I think this is also the other thing we were talking about warranties, that if you come up with a non-tested detailed rather than bog standard system, like off the shelf catalog system for putting, like, whether it be a window system or a balcony detailed or whatever it is, if you try and sort of work it out yourself and go, we'll just put that there and put that there, then everyone goes, well, who's going to warranty that? And that's the problem. It's just constant risk. We're very, very risk averse, quite rightly so. Yeah. But I think that's where the challenge is. We're now in the world where every kind of detail, every way of doing things needs to be warranted. If you do something slightly off, slightly different, then it's less likely to be warranted by the major players such as NHBC or LABC, which you need that for. The client will want to see that, the contractor will want to see that. So it makes it very difficult to do things differently, particularly on large scale projects, which therefore means we just resort back to the way we've always built, and we have not really been changing the way that we have been building our buildings.
Do you think there's some possibility, so I want to talk about your affordable housing work, do you think there's some possibility for council and housing led housing association led projects to be able to be more innovative, where the government could be taking a lead and backing them up?
Well, this is the other question about who should be building our affordable housing, and I think I would really love, personally, I would love to see, rather than the government relying on the private sector, the government to push and build social and affordable homes, because it's an investment. As we know, property is an investment. I'm not an economist, so everyone might say I'm talking absolute rubbish, but property is an investment. You're losing so much money on temporary accommodation, as we know.
Bankrupting councils across the country.
And then with that, the government could lead the way on new ways of building. I mean, maybe they could lead the way on this bio-based materials in their new towns, which is likely to be out of city centres. Everything is going to likely be much lower rise. I mean, there's a really innovative developer, Jonathan Smales, who's doing the Phoenix development in Lewis. And he's leading the way.
What's the Phoenix development in Lewis? Tell us about it.
It's a master plan near Lewis, and I think Jonathan Smales' background is Greenpeace. And he is actually trying to do things differently. But he's one small developer.
And you need stuff to bed in across an entire sector to make a difference.
Wouldn't it be great if Barratt or Berkeley were building in the same way? But they're not. They're building in their bog standard way that they know.
Way.
Even in their layouts, actually, it's the sort of lots of tarmac, not very many trees, houses sort of only like a foot apart so that they are detached, which is obviously a massive waste of space. If you look at I looked at a really great lady called Dinah Borner has written this book called All to Play For, and it's about play. Again, I've interviewed her on my podcast.
You should listen to today's podcast.
Yeah, basically. There was a page in her book where she had the sort of a bog standard developer scheme, like a I don't want to, because some of these are my clients and they do great things too. But bog standard developer scheme, out of town development. We've seen them all. We've seen them, and then the area, and then compared that to other developments which had architect input, by the way. The really telling one was Port Loop in Birmingham, and the bog standard development delivered half the amount of homes in the same area and way less green space and way less biodiversity, way less play space than Port Loop. Which is an urban splash scheme in Birmingham. The Port Loop scheme, they open up all the gardens behind. So rather than having there's a thing that we always sort of design places in the way that we think people want to live, rather than actually saying this is how you could live, and actually maybe it might be a little bit better. So rather than having little, not very great little gardens patches, all fenced off, they just opened up the gardens between the homes. Everyone had a little terracey space, but then all the kids have got a huge garden, lots of greenery, lots of trees, lots of planting, a huge space to play, perfect safety. And it's much, much better than having the tiny little rubbish fenced off space where nobody talks to anyone. Everyone feels a bit lonely.
It's that kind of social vision of architecture, if you like.
Some
of those ideas that came through in the middle of the 20th century where you're designing for people to meet each other. That kind of thing.
Exactly. I think, so when we talk about innovation, there's innovation in how we build, and there's an innovation in the sort of design of what we build, and it's not just about the pretty bits, it's also about the actual master plan vision of, okay, let's make these spaces more car free, let's add in more planting. Is there a different way of laying things out so people are more likely to see each other? I mean, my big concern with the whole new towns is, I think it's great, building on great idea. What I really hope is that these are actually places and not the sort of out of town places, which is just to see of housing and nothing else. I think
that's about building in workspace, right? And jobs and economy, and also building in such a way as they're likely to grow, and there's likely to be independent development, either on a small or large scale, separate from the government-led projects in the future. But you need to build a town which has social spaces, workspaces, etc., as opposed to some very large housing estates that don't have that.
Yeah, and places for entertainment.
Yeah.
I think that's the key one. Places to get people out of their homes and interacting with each other. And I think that's what how you form a community. And maybe your homes don't need to be as big. Do you see what I mean? If you have more places to go, more green space to hang out, we can be innovative with density, size of homes, if there's other spaces to interact as well, which again might be controversial, but I do feel sometimes there's this like everyone has to have this huge house and this huge garden, but then they don't talk to anybody else, and I think maybe we need to flex it up a little bit.
Oh, I don't know. I live in a flat and I'm not sure I want to talk to my neighbours. No. Okay, cool. We're going to cut this bit and make it sound slick.
Yeah.
Now,
I've totally digressed a lot.
No, it's great. It's been really good information, but I'm like, okay, so now I'm going to reflect on new towns, and then if we talk a bit more about affordable housing viability, why it's difficult, what needs to happen. Great. So from new towns, which there's a lot of excitement about new towns, a lot of hope about new towns, and new towns we were hearing last week on the podcast. People who live in the old lot of new towns are the most excited about other new towns near them, but they're excited about new towns rather than urban extensions, because it's that center of a place. It's a kind of a holistic community. It's not just houses, it's about all of the other things. So that's exciting stuff. But I want to talk about your affordable housing work, because we're in London at the moment. It can't escape us here that we have severe need for more affordable housing, and whilst some has been built, it's not been built quickly enough. Some people would say, and I would say actually, that some of the stuff being built isn't as good quality as it should be. There are some excellent examples of council-led projects and regen projects by social landlords that are very good. But there were also some of them, they were all Jays. But there are also frustrations and anger with housing associations that are not doing a very good job in managing some projects, which isn't necessarily about the design of them, but it could be.
No, there's a big challenge that I understand housing associations and local authorities have recently had. So again, a large proportion of our work historically was actually designing homes for local authorities, and it's really sad to see that a lot of the local authorities in London are no longer building their own schemes. Because everything goes back to money. And there's a lot of skill in the local authorities now. They sort of started building their own homes in 2010. That's now on hold. Everything is now going to be JV partnerships with the private sector, which is not necessarily bad things. It means projects will still happen. It does mean that I think those smaller infill sites, which councils have a lot of, are actually a bit more of a challenge, because a lot of the developers that the councils want to go into partnership with, the scale is not enough for them. So this was a conversation I had with a developer the other day, and I do worry that these infill sites, which are perfect to get going, they're more likely to be low rise. They can be sort of, we can start building them and designing them.
They're also where people actually live, in the community people actually live in, and you can do a local letting scheme, and it can be for people from that actual area, as opposed to where I live in or I used to live in Bethnal Green. If you live in Bethnal Green and you're overcrowded, you don't necessarily want to move to another house or a flat in the Isle of Dogs. You want to be in housing that suits your needs in Bethnal Green. And it's a shame if those infill schemes aren't going to come through, because they give us more homes.
I can't say for certain, but I see them being more of a challenge because of viability, and if everything is going to be a JV with.
And what's going on with viability?
Basically, it costs more. The cost of building is very, very close to the cost of what you get back. But this is where local authorities if they have their own land already, which London local authorities are in a unique position. The challenges in out of London, where a lot of local authorities have sold all their land, or they didn't have so much land in the first place, it's much, much harder. But I do think, again, I would personally like to see local authorities to continue to build, and this requires government investment to make that happen. And I've talked, so not only just about infill schemes in terms of like flatted developments, there is also scope for like a pattern book approach for houses. So on some of those really small sites are actually quite a challenge to build anything else on. You could have a single pattern book designed, or a few different pattern book designed homes, low-rise houses that you could reel out. And again, they'd likely be timber frame. They could even be built by small developers, community land trusts, individuals perhaps. I mean, we did a design of a house in Newham that was replicated across 6 sites. And that design exists, and you could actually just reuse that again and again. We did some bungalows for Greenwich, and that utilised really small sites that in conservation areas that you wouldn't be able to build anything else. And these bungalows were all for the over 60s. And there's also the thinking about chain of benefit.
Yeah.
So those homes for the over 60s meant that these residents moved from council houses with spare rooms to bungalows, which were much more suitable to their needs.
Yeah.
I mean, they are all really happy. They love them because they're level access. They're exactly what they need. There's a spare room for a carer. All of these things, and by doing that actually frees up more bed spaces, more space to help them with the overcrowding with families. Yeah. And we had a similar one in Southwark, which was 25 homes built within an existing estate, but they did a sort of reshuffle with everyone's permission. It was a community-led scheme, but by building 25 homes, it helped 100 families. So I think, again, thinking
because of the move on and people being in more suitable housing for their needs. Yeah. Okay, interesting.
So again, I think thinking innovatively about using our land, our space, our housing efficiently without obviously understanding people's homes and people love where they live. Yeah. But, I think working together, we can be a bit cleverer with what we're doing as well, and spending money where it matters. And I think these infill sites are quite important, and I do hope that they do come off. But I think
so perhaps a role for the Mayor of London in that, because whilst I really strongly support council built housing, I do see, and having worked in local authorities in the past, I have seen that it's difficult to get several small teams across lots of different councils up to speed doing the same thing. When you were talking there about pattern book approaches, you have lots of small teams, and every council having a very small team. Is there not scope for a kind of a larger GLA team to take on some of this stuff and get it moving, bulk up that expertise and share it?
Well, yeah, I remember years ago I was talking to this guy from the Newham maintenance department, and he's like, well, I've got guys that can do plasterboarding, that can fix a roof, can do all the plumbing, they can basically do all the bits. I just don't have the structure. So they set up a timber frame factory, and they also had a factory making, I don't like PVC windows, but they're making putting together PVC windows. And with that, they did build a couple of houses, but then you just think, well, why not share?
Do it on scale.
Like Newham have a timber frame factory, Islington have a window factory, and actually and share resource and share risk in that way. And I think that could be really great. Why not? It would be amazing.
Yeah, I mean that would be great in terms of as well the public benefit, the jobs. You could use it to train up people. Public interest, public construction. We love that stuff on the podcast.
Well, yeah, and I think the guys working in the factory were sort of some people with special needs, sort of employing people, training people up who maybe would have found it difficult to get a job in other ways. So they sort of put them through a program, and so it was benefiting in so many ways. And then obviously again, the council don't need to make a profit for shareholders in the same way. And I just thought it was actually, why not? That's a really great idea.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds great. So we're coming to the end of the pod.
Yes,
but I just wanted to... No, you've been great. You're so interesting. Thank you so much. But I think the thing that I'm going to take away from this pod really is there's a theme running through it, which is kind of public leadership to get either public house building projects going or innovation within the construction sector working, and that need to make regulations work effectively and quickly, but also ensure that there is this kind of push and this planning for innovation to make it actually happen, rather than it being kind of thwarted by barriers such as warranties, etc., and the private sector not being particularly innovative, and perhaps a scope for that in some of our new towns and some of our social house building programs within our cities as well.
Yeah. Do you want me to?
Yeah, please.
Through that. Yeah, I think there needs to be, we've got this very, very almost like Tigger ambition, which is great. We're going to build all these homes. planning is not really so much the problem anymore.
Okay.
So I think it is about looking at where the stumbling blocks are, having a bit more of an understanding of how the construction sector works, which I think the government need to really get to grips of. Understanding, not just talking to the really, really big organisations, because I think there's the other element that the construction sector is a large proportion of SMEs. So I'm from a practice of 30 people. I can be designing a master plan for a project with 1,000 homes in it, which I think is not quite understood.
Yeah, so
it's like,
small organisation means small projects.
Yeah,
not the case.
That's not the case. And same with not just in architects, engineers, across the board. I mean, to be an SME, you need to be 250. We've got hardly any architecture practices in the UK that are 250 people. The majority of these really ambitious projects, really great housing, are being designed by practices similar size to mine, maybe a little bit bigger, but so don't just talk to the big house builders, the big organisations. Talk to understand the rest of the sector, and then I think it needs all of these things to be more sustainable, to build good quality homes, to build them in the right place at the right time. I think it's a coming together. So it's like we've got the ambition, now we really need to ask the question, how and what, and maybe who should be building them as well. And I think it's exciting, and it's almost like this house building renaissance, but it needs to be like, not we're just going to build some homes. They should be like the best designed, they should be exciting, they should be joyful, the places should be joyful,
they should be affordable,
they should be healthy places, and they should be sustainable, not just as in they're not using loads and loads of energy, but sustainable in terms of the actual fabric that they're built on. But that's going to take a mass coming together of all aspects of the sector, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for joining me, Jay.